In the vast wheat fields of Kansas during the Great Depression, where dust storms devoured dreams and poverty forced impossible choices, unfolds a story that will forever change how you view sacrifice, love, and the extraordinary lengths one person will go to save another. This is the incredible tale of Jeremiah Jed Stone, a solitary farmer who made a decision so shocking that it stunned an entire community and proved that sometimes the most valuable things in life can't be measured in money, but in the courage to give everything for someone who has nothing. If you're ready for a story that will restore your faith in human goodness and show you that heroes emerge in the most unexpected moments, hit that like button and subscribe for more amazing tales of compassion and sacrifice. Don't forget to let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. We love connecting with our incredible global community. The dust-laden wind of April 1934 whipped across the barren fields surrounding the small town of Millbrook, Kansas, carrying with it the bitter scent of failed crops and broken dreams. Jeremiah Stone stood in the doorway of his weathered barn, watching his neighbors load their few remaining possessions into rickety wagons, preparing to join the exodus of families fleeing the Dust Bowl for the promised lands of California. At 36, Jed had already buried a wife and infant son, victims of the influenza epidemic that had swept through Kansas 2 years earlier. Since then, he had lived alone on his 160-acre farm with only his horse Thunder for company. Thunder wasn't just transportation for Jed. The magnificent chestnut stallion was his closest friend, his work partner, and often the only reason he found the strength to face each new day of struggle against the relentless drought and economic collapse. The sound of approaching voices pulled Jed from his melancholy observations. A small group was walking down the dirt road toward town, and as they drew closer, he could see it was the Kowalski family, Polish immigrants who had been farming the land adjacent to his for nearly a decade. But something about their body language suggested this wasn't a casual visit to town. "Morning, Jed," called out Stefan Kowalski, a man in his 40s whose face bore the deep lines carved by years of hard labor and worry. Behind him walked his wife Katarina, their 3 teenage sons, and their 8-year-old daughter Anya, who clutched a small bundle of belongings against her chest. "Stefan," Jed nodded in greeting. "Heading to town?" "Yes," Stefan replied, but his voice carried a weight that suggested this was no ordinary trip. We're leaving for California tomorrow. The bank foreclosed on our farm yesterday." Jed felt his heart sink. The Kowalskis had been good neighbors, always willing to help during harvest time or when someone fell ill. The thought of them joining the desperate migration west troubled him deeply. "I'm sorry to hear that, Stefan. I know how hard you fought to keep that land. Sometimes fighting isn't enough." Katarina spoke for the first time, her heavily accented English thick with emotion. "Sometimes you have to make choices that break your heart." As they stood talking, Jed noticed that young Anya seemed particularly distressed, her large brown eyes filled with tears that she was trying desperately not to shed. She was a beautiful child with long blonde braids and the kind of gentle spirit that had always made her a favorite among the neighbors. "What about Anya?" Jed asked, suddenly realizing that the family's body language suggested something more complex than a simple farewell. Stefan and Katarina exchanged a look of pure anguish. "That's why we stopped," Stefan said quietly. "Jed, we need to ask you something, and we know it's not fair, but we don't have any other choice." "What is it?" Katarina knelt down and pulled Anya close, speaking to her in rapid Polish before turning back to Jed. "We have enough money to get 5 people to California, food, gas, a place to stay when we get there, but we cannot afford to take all 6 of us." The implication of her words hit Jed like a physical blow. "You're asking me to—" "We're asking if you would consider taking Anya," Stefan said, his voice breaking. "We know you're a good man, Jed. We know you would take care of her. And when we get settled in California, when we find work and can save money, we'll send for her." Jed looked down at Anya, who was staring up at him with those enormous brown eyes, clearly understanding that her entire future was being decided in this moment. The idea of separating a family was heartbreaking, but he also understood the impossible position the Kowalskis found themselves in. "I would be honored to care for Anya," Jed said quietly, "but I need you to understand something. I don't have much money left either. I can provide food and shelter, but I can't pay you anything for—" "We don't want money," Stefan interrupted. "We would never sell our daughter. We're asking you to take her as family, to love her and protect her until we can be together again." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Walt Morrison, a local businessman who had been buying up foreclosed farms and livestock from desperate families leaving the area. Morrison was known for driving hard bargains with people who had no other options, and his presence immediately changed the dynamics of the conversation. "Well, well," Morrison said as he approached the group. "The Kowalski family. I heard you folks were heading west tomorrow." "Yes, Mr. Morrison," Stefan replied cautiously. "I've been thinking about our conversation yesterday, about the livestock you couldn't fit in your wagon. I'm prepared to make you an offer for that horse of yours, Stone." Jed felt his blood run cold. Thunder was grazing in the pasture behind the barn, visible from where they stood. The horse represented not just Jed's livelihood, but his emotional anchor, the one constant in his life since losing his family. "Thunder's not for sale, Morrison. Everything's for sale at the right price, Stone, and these folks need money more than you need that horse. I'll give you $50 for him." $50 was a substantial sum in 1934, enough to help the Kowalskis significantly with their journey. But the thought of losing Thunder was almost unbearable for Jed. "That's generous, Mr. Morrison," Stefan said carefully, "but it's not our horse to sell." Morrison's eyes lit up with the kind of predatory gleam that Jed had learned to recognize in men who took advantage of others' desperation. "No, but I bet Stone here would be willing to make a trade. $50 for the horse, and you folks take your daughter with you to California." The suggestion hung in the air like a challenge. Morrison was essentially proposing that Jed trade his most valuable possession, his only companion and means of working his farm, to keep the Kowalski family together. Jed looked at Thunder, grazing peacefully in the spring sunshine, then at Anya, who was listening to the adult conversation with the solemn understanding that children develop when their world is falling apart around them. "Mr. Morrison," Jed said slowly, "I need to think about this." "Don't think too long, Stone. I'm heading back to town in an hour, and this offer expires when I leave." After Morrison departed, the Kowalskis and Jed stood in uncomfortable silence, all of them understanding the impossible choice that had been laid before them. "Jed," Stefan said finally, "we can't ask you to give up your horse for us. Thunder means everything to you." Jed knelt down so that he was at eye level with Anya. "Sweetheart, do you want to go to California with your family?" Anya nodded solemnly. "Yes, sir, but I would be okay staying with you too, if that's what has to happen." The maturity in her response broke Jed's heart. This 8-year-old child was prepared to sacrifice her own desires for the sake of her family's survival, just as her parents were prepared to sacrifice their daughter for the same reason. "Anya," Jed said gently, "what if I told you that I could help your whole family stay together?" "How?" Jed stood up and looked at Stefan and Katerina, knowing that what he was about to say would change all their lives forever. "I'll trade Thunder to Morrison for the money. You take Anya with you to California, and I'll find another way to work my farm." The silence that followed was deafening. Stefan started to protest, but Jed held up his hand. "This isn't charity, and it's not a sacrifice I'm making reluctantly. Thunder is a horse. Anya is a little girl who belongs with her family. The choice is easy." Katerina began crying openly, and Stefan's eyes filled with tears as well. "Jed, we cannot accept such a gift. Thunder is your livelihood." "Thunder is a horse," Jed repeated firmly. "I can find another horse, maybe not as good, but I can't find another Anya, and you can't replace the years she would lose growing up separated from her family." 20 minutes later, Walt Morrison returned to find Jed leading Thunder toward the road, the magnificent stallion's bridle gleaming in the afternoon sun. "Changed your mind, Stone?" "I have. $50 for Thunder, and the money goes to the Kowalskis to help them get to California." Morrison examined Thunder with the practiced eye of a man who knew horseflesh. "He's a fine animal. Deal." As Morrison counted out $50 in bills and coins, Jed ran his hand along Thunder's neck one last time, whispering words of farewell to the horse that had been his companion through the darkest period of his life. "Thank you, Thunder," he said quietly. "You're going to help a family stay together. I think you'd approve of that." When the transaction was complete and Morrison had led Thunder away, Jed turned to find the entire Kowalski family staring at him with expressions of gratitude, disbelief, and profound respect. "How can we ever repay you?" Katerina asked through her tears. "You can't," Jed replied simply, "and you don't need to. Just take care of each other, and remember that sometimes the most valuable things we can give are the things we can't afford to lose." As the Kowalskis prepared to leave for town to make their final preparations for the journey west, Anya broke away from her family and ran back to Jed. "Mr. Stone," she said, looking up at him with those solemn brown eyes, "I'll never forget what you did for us. Just promise me you'll be happy, Anya. Promise me you'll grow up to be the remarkable woman I know you're going to become. I promise." That evening, as Jed sat alone on his porch watching the sunset paint the Kansas sky in shades of gold and crimson, he felt the profound loneliness of a man who had just given away his closest companion. But beneath the sadness was something else, a sense of purpose and rightness that he hadn't felt since before his wife and son died. He had traded his horse for a little girl's future, and as he watched the last light fade from the western horizon, Jed Stone knew it was the best deal he had ever made. The ripple effects of sacrifice. 3 weeks after the Kowalskis' departure, word of Jed Stone's extraordinary sacrifice had spread throughout the farming communities of central Kansas like ripples in a still pond. The story of the man who had traded his only horse to keep a family together had become the kind of tale that people shared around kitchen tables and at church gatherings, a bright spot of human decency in a time when desperation often brought out the worst in people. Dr. Samuel Morrison, Walt's brother and the town's physician, was the first to arrive at Jed's farm on a crisp May morning, his medical bag in hand and his face showing the kind of determined purpose that Jed had learned to associate with people who were about to complicate his carefully ordered solitude. "Morning, Jed," Dr. Morrison called out as he climbed down from his buggy. "Thought I'd stop by and see how you're managing without Thunder." Jed paused in his work of hand-cultivating the vegetable garden behind his house, wiping sweat from his forehead with the back of his sleeve. Without Thunder to pull the plow, he had been reduced to working his small plots by hand, a labor-intensive process that left him exhausted by midday. "Managing fine, Doc. What brings you out this way?" "Professional curiosity, mostly, but also this." Dr. Morrison reached into his buggy and pulled out a worn leather bridle and saddle. "These belonged to my father's old mare. She died last winter, and I thought you might have use for them when you get another horse." Jed studied the older man's face, recognizing the kindness behind the practical gesture. "That's generous, Doc, but I'm not sure when I'll be able to afford another horse." "Funny thing about that," Dr. Morrison said with a slight smile. "Seems like there are a few people in town who've been talking about your situation. Mrs. Patterson at the general store mentioned that she's got more work than she can handle, what with people needing supplies for their journeys west. She could use someone to help with deliveries and heavy lifting. I appreciate the thought, but I can't leave my farm unattended." That's where Reverend Thompson comes in. He's organized a group of men from the church to help with your spring planting. They figure if you're going to be working in town to earn money for a new horse, they can make sure your crops get in the ground. Jed felt his carefully maintained independence beginning to crumble under the weight of his community's generosity. "Doc, I can't accept charity." "It's not charity, Jed. It's neighbors helping neighbors. And frankly, After what you did for the Kowalski family, there's not a person in 3 counties who wouldn't be honored to lend you a hand." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of another wagon, this one driven by Tom Bradley, who owned the livery stable in town. In the back of his wagon was a large bay mare that immediately caught Jed's attention. "Morning, Jed, Doc," Tom called out as he climbed down from his wagon. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" "Tom," Jed replied cautiously, sensing that this wasn't a social visit either. "I've got a proposition for you, Jed. This here's Rosie." Tom gestured toward the mare. "She's 12 years old, gentle as a lamb, and strong enough to pull a plow. Previous owner headed west last month and couldn't take her along." "Tom, I can't afford to buy a horse right now." "Who said anything about buying? I'm talking about a trade arrangement. You work for me at the livery stable 3 days a week, and Rosie here stays with you the other 4 days to help with your farm work. Fair trade for fair work." Jed looked at the mare, noting her calm disposition and the intelligent gleam in her eyes. She wasn't Thunder. No horse could replace Thunder, but she was clearly a solid, dependable animal who could help him maintain his farm. "Why would you do this, Tom?" "Because what you did for that little girl and her family reminded all of us what this community is supposed to be about. We take care of each other, especially when times are hard." Over the next several hours, a steady stream of neighbors arrived at Jed's farm, each bringing some form of assistance or support. Mrs. Patterson from the general store offered him part-time work making deliveries. Reverend Thompson arrived with a crew of men ready to help with the spring planting. Sarah Mitchell, the schoolteacher, brought news that she had been corresponding with the Kowalskis and that they had safely reached California. "Anya asked me to give you this," Sarah said, handing Jed a carefully folded piece of paper. "She drew it for you during their stop in Colorado." Jed unfolded the paper to reveal a child's drawing of a man standing next to a horse, with the words, "Thank you, Mr. Stone," written in careful block letters across the bottom. The simple artwork brought tears to his eyes, confirming that his sacrifice had been worthwhile. But the most surprising visitor arrived just as the sun was beginning to set. Walt Morrison drove up in his expensive automobile, looking uncharacteristically uncomfortable as he approached the group of men who were finishing the day's planting work. "Stone," Walt said without preamble, "I need to talk to you." The other men sensed the tension in the air and began gathering their tools, preparing to leave Jed and Walt to their conversation. As they departed, each man made a point of shaking Jed's hand and confirming their return the following day to continue the planting. "What can I do for you, Walt?" Jed asked when they were alone. Walt Morrison was a man who had built his wealth by taking advantage of others' misfortunes, and his discomfort in this situation was obvious. "I've been doing some thinking about that horse trade we made." "What about it?" "Thunder's worth more than $50, probably worth twice that, maybe more. I knew it when I made the deal, and you knew it too." Jed studied Walt's face, trying to understand where this conversation was heading. "The deal's done, Walt. I'm not looking to renegotiate. That's not what I'm talking about." Walt reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a roll of bills. "I'm talking about paying you what Thunder was actually worth. Here's another $50. I don't want your money, Walt. It's not my money, it's yours. It's what you should have gotten for that horse in the first place." Jed looked at the money Walt was offering, understanding that this gesture represented something more complex than simple business ethics. "Walt, why are you doing this?" Walt was quiet for a long moment, staring out over the freshly planted fields that surrounded Jed's farmhouse. "My brother Sam told me what you've been saying around town, about how you traded Thunder to keep a family together, about how some things are more valuable than money. That's what I believe. Well, it got me thinking about some of the deals I've made lately, about families I've separated when I foreclosed on their farms, about people I've taken advantage of because I could." Walt held out the money again. "Take the money, Stone, and use it for something that matters. Maybe it'll help me sleep better at night, knowing that at least one good thing came out of my business dealings." As Walt drove away, leaving the extra money on Jed's porch, Jed reflected on the unexpected ways that a single act of generosity could ripple through a community. His decision to trade Thunder had not only kept the Kowalski family together, but had apparently inspired his neighbors to rediscover the values of mutual support and compassion that had sustained rural communities for generations. The following morning brought a letter from California, written in Katerina Kowalski's careful handwriting. Dear Jed, we have arrived safely in California, and Stefan has found work in the orchards near Bakersfield. The children are all healthy, and Anya starts school next week. She talks about you every day, and has drawn dozens of pictures of you and Thunder. We will never forget your kindness, and we will find a way to repay you someday. Thank you for giving us our daughter's future. Your grateful friends, the Kowalski family. That afternoon, as Jed worked alongside Rosie in the fields, he found himself thinking about the chain of events that had begun with an impossible choice and had led to this moment of renewed purpose and community connection. He had lost Thunder, but he had gained something perhaps more valuable, the knowledge that his life could have meaning beyond his own survival, that his choices could make a difference in the lives of others. Well, Rosie, he said to the patient mare, as they worked together to cultivate the corn rows, I don't suppose you'll ever replace Thunder in my heart, but maybe that's not what matters. Maybe what matters is that we're here, doing good work, and somewhere in California, a little girl is growing up with her family because we all made the right choices. As the sun set over the Kansas plains, Jed Stone understood that sometimes the most valuable things we can possess are the memories of the good we've done, and the knowledge that our sacrifices have made the world a little bit better for someone else. The unexpected return. 2 years had passed since Jed's sacrifice when the letter arrived that would change everything once again. It was September 1936, and the morning was crisp with the first hint of autumn when Sarah Mitchell, the schoolteacher, rode out to Jed's farm with news that would test everything he thought he understood about endings and new beginnings. Jed? Sarah called out as she dismounted from her horse near the barn where he was repairing a section of fence. I have a letter for you. It came with the mail shipment from California yesterday. Jed wiped his hands on his work shirt and accepted the envelope, immediately recognizing Katerina Kowalski's handwriting. Over the past 2 years, he had received regular updates from the family, news of Stefan's steady work in the orchards, reports of the boy's progress in school, and always drawings and notes from Anya, who had grown from an 8-year-old into a confident 10-year-old who wrote to him about her new friends, her studies, and her dreams for the future. But something about this letter felt different. The envelope was thicker than usual, and Sarah's expression suggested that she knew more about its contents than she was letting on. Is everything all right with the family? Jed asked as he opened the envelope. Why don't you read the letter, and then we'll talk, Sarah replied, her voice carrying an emotion that made Jed's pulse quicken. Jed unfolded the carefully written pages and began to read. My dear friend Jed, I write to you with news that will seem impossible, but every word is true. Stefan's brother in Chicago has died and left Stefan his business, a successful bakery that has been in the family for 20 years. We are moving to Chicago next month, where Stefan will take over the bakery, and we will finally have the security we have dreamed of since leaving Kansas. But there is more news, and it is news that concerns you directly. Last month, we saw your horse Thunder at a livestock auction in Fresno. The man who owned him was selling all his animals because he was moving back east. When we told him Thunder's story about how you traded him to keep our family together, he was so moved that he refused to accept any payment from us. He said that Thunder belonged with people who understood his true value. Jed, Thunder is coming home to you. We have arranged for him to be transported to Kansas, and he should arrive next week. This is not a gift that you can refuse, because it is not a gift from us. It is something that was always yours, returning to where it belongs. Jed had to stop reading as his eyes filled with tears. The idea that Thunder, his beloved companion who had been sold out of necessity 2 years earlier, was somehow coming home seemed too wonderful to believe. Sarah reached out and squeezed his shoulder. There's more, Jed. Keep reading. But we are sending more than just Thunder back to you. We are sending Anya as well. Before you protest, please understand our reasoning. Chicago is a big city, and while we are grateful for the opportunities it will provide, we worry about raising Anya in such a place. She has grown into a remarkable young woman, intelligent and kind and strong, but she has never forgotten the lessons she learned on your farm and in the community that welcomed her. We are asking if you would consider becoming Anya's guardian, not because we are giving her away again, but because we believe that the life you can provide for her in Kansas, with good schools, fresh air, and the values of rural community, is better than what we can offer in the city. We would visit regularly, and she would spend summers with us, but we want her to grow up in the place that saved our family. If you agree to this arrangement, Anya will arrive with Thunder next week. If you do not feel you can take on this responsibility, we will understand and make other arrangements. But we hope you will say yes, because you have already proven yourself to be the kind of father figure that every child deserves. Jed set the letter down with hands that were shaking slightly, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what the Kowalskis were proposing. Thunder's return was a miracle in itself, but the idea of becoming responsible for Anya's upbringing was both thrilling and terrifying. "Sarah," he said quietly, "what do you think I should do?" "I think," Sarah replied, "that you should remember why you traded Thunder in the first place. You said that some things are more valuable than money, and that Anya belonged with her family. Well, maybe now her family is choosing to extend that definition to include you. But I'm a bachelor farmer. What do I know about raising a little girl? You know about kindness, sacrifice, and putting other people's needs before your own. Honestly, Jed, those are the most important qualifications for raising any child." Over the next several days, Jed found himself seeking advice from everyone in the community. Dr. Morrison assured him that Anya's medical needs could be easily managed. Reverend Thompson spoke about the spiritual significance of being entrusted with a child's welfare. Mrs. Patterson offered to help with clothes and supplies. Tom Bradley suggested enlarging the farmhouse to give Anya her own proper bedroom, but it was Mrs. Henderson, the elderly widow who had become something of a grandmother figure to the entire community, who provided the perspective that helped Jed make his decision. "Jed," she said as they sat on his porch on the evening before Thunder and Anya were scheduled to arrive, "that little girl has been writing to you for 2 years. In her letters, she calls you Papa Jed and talks about coming home to Kansas. In her mind, you're already her family. The only question is whether you're brave enough to accept that blessing." The train arrived in Millbrook on a crisp October morning, and half the town seemed to have gathered at the station to witness Thunder and Anya's homecoming. When the livestock car was opened and Thunder stepped onto the platform, looking magnificent despite his long journey, a cheer went up from the assembled crowd. But it was Anya who took Jed's breath away. The frightened 8-year-old who had clutched her belongings 2 years earlier had been replaced by a confident 10-year-old with bright eyes and an easy smile. She was taller, her blonde braids were longer, and she carried herself with the self-assurance of a child who had been loved and valued. "Papa Jed!" she called out as she ran toward him, using the name that felt as natural as breathing. "Hello, sweetheart," Jed said as he caught her in a hug that felt like coming home. "Welcome back to Kansas." "I've missed you so much," Anya said, pulling back to look at him. "And I've missed Thunder, and I've missed the farm, and I've missed everything about this place." As they walked Thunder back to the farm, with Anya chattering excitedly about her journey and her plans for the future, Jed reflected on the strange circularity of life. 2 years earlier, he had given up his most precious possession to keep a family together. Now, that family was entrusting him with their most precious possession, confident that he would provide the love and guidance that would help her flourish. "Papa Jed," Anya said as they reached the farmhouse, "Mama and Papa said I should ask you if you really want me to live here, or if you're just being kind because they asked you to." Jed knelt down so that he was at her eye level, just as he had done 2 years earlier when she was preparing to leave. "Anya, I want you to understand something." Having you here isn't a favor I'm doing for your parents. It's a gift they're giving to me. This house has been lonely for too long, and you're going to make it a home again. Really? Really? And Thunder's going to be happy to have you here too. He's missed you almost as much as I have. That evening, as Jed tucked Anya into the bed he had prepared in what had once been his wife's sewing room, she looked up at him with the same trust and affection he remembered from their first meeting. "Papa Jed, do you think Mama and Papa made the right decision sending me here? I think your parents made the decision that they believed was best for you, and I think they're right. But more importantly, what do you think?" Anya considered the question seriously. "I think this is where I belong. I think this is where I've always belonged, ever since you traded Thunder to keep our family together. Then this is where you'll stay, for as long as you want to be here." As Jed turned out the lamp and left Anya to sleep, he found Thunder waiting for him in the barn, as if the horse understood that their reunion was complete only now that all the pieces of their chosen family were back together. "Well, old friend," Jed said, running his hand along Thunder's neck, "looks like we're going to be raising a daughter together. Think we're up for the challenge?" Thunder nickered softly, and Jed chose to interpret it as enthusiasm for the adventure ahead. The family that Choice built. 10 years later, in the spring of 1946, the Millbrook Community Church was filled to capacity for a celebration that had brought together people from across 3 counties. Anya Kowalski Stone was graduating as valedictorian of her high school class and had been awarded a full scholarship to study agriculture at Kansas State University, the first woman in the county's history to receive such recognition. Jed sat in the front pew, his hair now silver and his face lined with the kind of wrinkles that come from years of smiling and laughing, with the daughter who had transformed his solitary existence into a life filled with purpose and joy. At 58, he had become one of the most respected farmers in the region, known not just for his innovative agricultural techniques, but for his dedication to helping young people discover their potential in rural life. "Ladies and gentlemen," announced Principal Robert Hayes, "it is my honor to introduce our valedictorian, Miss Anya Stone, who will address us on the topic of the value of chosen family." Anya walked to the podium with the confident grace of a young woman who had grown up knowing she was loved and valued. At 20, she was beautiful in the way that comes from intelligence, kindness, and the security of belonging somewhere completely. Her blonde hair was now styled in the fashionable waves of the 1940s, and she wore a simple blue dress that Jed had insisted on buying for the occasion. "Friends, neighbors, and fellow graduates," Anya began, her voice clear and strong, "I stand before you today as living proof that families are not just created by blood, but by choice, love, and the courage to sacrifice for others." The audience settled into attentive silence as Anya told her story, the story of parents who had been forced to choose between keeping their daughter and keeping their family together, of a farmer who had traded his most precious possession to ensure that choice never had to be made, and of a community that had embraced the radical idea that love creates stronger bonds than biology. 12 years ago," Anya continued, "my birth parents made the most difficult decision any parent can make. They asked a stranger to take responsibility for their daughter's welfare because they believed it was in her best interest. That stranger, my father, Jed Stone, made an equally difficult decision. He traded his beloved horse Thunder to ensure that I could stay with my family for their journey to California." Jed felt tears welling up in his eyes as Anya recounted the events that had shaped both their lives, but he also felt overwhelming pride in the articulate, confident young woman she had become. "But the story didn't end there," Anya went on. 2 years later, when my birth parents had achieved the security they had sought, they made another choice. They chose to entrust my upbringing to the man who had already proven his commitment to my welfare. They chose to expand their definition of family to include the person who had become essential to their daughter's happiness. In the audience, Stefan and Katarina Kowalski sat with their 3 sons, all of whom had made the journey from Chicago to witness Anya's graduation. Stefan now owned 3 successful bakeries, and the family had prospered beyond their wildest dreams. But they had never forgotten the debt they owed to the Kansas farmer who had made their success possible. Today, I am graduating with honors from high school and preparing to attend college, thanks to the sacrifices and support of 2 sets of parents who have loved me unconditionally, Anya said. But more than that, I am graduating with an understanding of what real love looks like. Real love is putting someone else's needs before your own. Real love is making impossible choices for the right reasons. Real love is recognizing that families can be built through intention and commitment just as surely as through blood. After the ceremony, the celebration moved to the Stone Farm, where neighbors and friends gathered for a barbecue that had become an annual tradition. Thunder, now ancient at 26 but still magnificent, grazed peacefully in the pasture while children played around him, understanding instinctively that this was a horse with a special place in their community's history. "Jed," Stefan Kowalski said as the 2 men stood watching Anya receive congratulations from her classmates and teachers, "I want you to know that Katarina and I have never regretted our decision to ask you to raise our daughter. Look at the woman she's become. Look at the opportunities she has. We could never have given her this. Stefan, you gave her the most important thing any parent can give a child, the security of knowing she's loved. The rest was just details." Dr. Morrison, now in his 70s but still practicing medicine, joined the conversation. "You know, Jed, in 30 years of medical practice, I've seen many families struggle with difficult circumstances. But I've never seen a situation handled with more wisdom and love than this one." As the evening wore on and guests began to depart, Anya found Jed sitting on the porch where they had shared countless conversations over the years. "Papa," she said, settling into the chair beside him, "I have something to tell you." "What's that, sweetheart?" "I've decided to specialize in agricultural education when I get to college. I want to come back here after graduation and help other young people learn that farming isn't just about crops and livestock. It's about building communities and taking care of each other." Jed smiled at his daughter, remembering the frightened 8-year-old who had once sat in this same spot, uncertain about her future. "That sounds perfect, Anya. This community will always need people who understand that the most important crops we grow are the relationships between neighbors. And Papa, I want you to know that trading Thunder for my family was the best decision anyone ever made. Not just because it kept us together then, but because it brought us all together permanently." Indeed, as the stars appeared in the Kansas sky and thunder whinnied softly from the pasture, Jed reflected on the extraordinary journey that had begun with an impossible choice and had led to this moment of perfect contentment. The story of Jed Stone Thunder and Anya proves that sometimes the most valuable things we can give are the things we can least afford to lose. What began with a farmer's heartbreaking sacrifice became a testament to the transformative power of chosen family and the recognition that love creates bonds stronger than blood. Today, the Stone Farm continues to thrive under Anya's management, serving as both a working agricultural operation and an educational center where young people learn sustainable farming practices and community values. The scholarship fund established in Jed's honor has helped dozens of rural students attend college, and Thunder's story has become legendary throughout Kansas as an example of how one act of selfless love can create ripples that last for generations. But perhaps the most important lesson from their journey is this: when we choose to put others' needs before our own, when we sacrifice our most precious possessions for someone else's welfare, we don't lose what matters most. We discover what matters most. Jed thought he was trading his horse for a little girl's future. Instead, he was trading loneliness for love, isolation for family, and emptiness for a legacy that would endure forever. If this incredible story of sacrifice, love, and chosen family touched your heart, please hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to be reminded that real love means putting others first. Subscribe for more amazing tales that prove family is about choice, not just blood, and that the greatest gifts often come from our greatest sacrifices. Don't forget to let us know in the comments which city you're watching from. Have you ever made a sacrifice that seemed impossible at the time but led to something wonderful? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire someone else to choose love over comfort when the moment calls for courage.